On this video, I'm gonna take you through the steps on how I go about creating this painting. Before we get started on this painting, I would like to tell you, if you're interested in learning how to airbrush photorealism, you can visit my website, fineartairbrushcourses.com. There you can find full-length, step-by-step courses that will take you from the beginning to the end of a painting, and you will be able to recreate that same painting without the need of any stencils or any external tools. There I focus into helping you build your skills so that you can paint whatever you want with your own skills. Using external tools such as HD stencils or templates or whatever, it's a good thing, but the most important thing is having the knowledge to paint. Once you have the knowledge, the fundamentals of how to paint, then you can basically paint whatever you want. Okay, let's get started on this dragon now. One of the things that I like to do is use an HD stencil. I use HD stencils every single time I'm doing motorcycles because it gives me a perfect layout so that I can begin the painting and complete it as fast as possible. And the HD stencil, you can spray it as dark as you want or as faint of a layout that you want. I like to be kind of like on the lighter side. I don't like to spray the stencil too much because then it's kind of hard to get rid of the stencil. And you know, as we work, that's one of the goals we have. We want to get rid of that stencil look. So once I have my stencil layout, I'm using here illustration colors. So I go with the black illustration colors, and this color, it's sort of like semi-opaque. You know, if you use a lot of transparent base, the color is transparent. But in this case, in the very beginning of this painting, I'm going and I'm putting down where I see all the darkest shadows, all the darkest tones on this painting. And as we paint something, we're always looking for what is dark, for what is middle tones, and what is highlights. In this case, I thought the right approach to do this painting was to first go and kill the dark areas. So I put a really dark base of color. I'm pretty much covering what the HD stencil gave me. The HD stencil, like I said earlier, it gives me the layout, but some of that I'm following, some of that I'm just making up, because making up some areas, especially on so much texture like here, it's a lot easier to create that out of like what you think it should look like rather than copying the picture. So in that aspect, I'm just covering where all the black areas are supposed to go. And that is just to prepare it so I can come back later and do my highlights. As I put down the dark tones, although I love airbrushing, one of the things that I've figured out is that if you try doing everything with the airbrush by itself, then you limit yourself. There is so many tools available, and the airbrush is just one tool that we can use. You know, that's why I rather call this an acrylic painting rather than an airbrush painting, because in reality, we don't do a lot of artists that you see doing airbrushing. They don't do everything just with an airbrush. Especially when you're working at this small scale, you definitely need the help of many other tools, including brushes. In this case, I use a lot of erasing. So for that erasing tool that you see, it's not an electric eraser, it's actually a Dremel. It's called a Dremel Stylo. And you can find the link and read more about it if you care about buying one of those for yourselves. I'm not using an electric eraser because an electric eraser is not powerful enough for removing paint from a motorcycle. Basically, I'm working on top of clear coat. So the Dremel has a lot of variation. It has constant power, first of all. I don't need to be holding a trigger. And it also has speeds. Believe it or not, I'm using the max speed on this thing because the paint attaches to the surface so strong that it's really hard to remove it. So that's why I'm using this tool here. And I'm changing between different tools. I put some sticks, sometimes some grinding stones, but the one that works the best is the erasers, of course, because they have the nice friction. It just basically lifts the paint. With this eraser, I'm just going for the highlights, for the brightest parts. Where I see on my photograph, on my reference, I see that it looks almost white. But not only those parts, this is important. I'm not just going for those light parts. I'm also going for the middle tones, and I'm just removing paint everywhere. And that's what I'm creating there. I'm just creating highlights everywhere. And some of those parts will remain full white, but a lot of those parts I'll come back with the airbrush and glaze them. So with the glaze, basically applying transparent paint, I'm gonna bring down those tones and reduce the brightness so that I'll be creating basically middle tones by doing that. It's a really simple process. If I have to describe it to you, I would say I'm doing the dark parts, then I'm painting the highlights on top of the dark parts, and then I'm coming back with the airbrush and adjusting those soft transitions of middle tones. Middle tones usually range from really light tones to really dark tones, and in that the airbrush is king. But I will not even attempt to airbrush all these white spots with an airbrush. That would just be insane. Believe it or not, painting this dragon, although it looks so incredible, it's not as hard as it might look. Not because of the edge to stencil, yeah, that part helps a lot, but because it's a simple process actually. If you don't know how to paint, this might look amazing. This is like, wow, so much detail. But forget about detail. I only see two things when I'm painting. I see this is black, I see this is white. Just that. And then, of course, after that, I figured out, okay, this has a shape, you know, these scales. And I'm not following the scales, I'm not copying them precisely. In my mind, I'm like, okay, this kind of looks like this kind of looks like that. And then I just go for it. And one of the reasons why I'm confident on just removing the paint, and even if it doesn't look right, is because I can always come back and apply black and redo it, you know, erase that part again and try to create the white highlight. But it's all about what is black, what is white. That's all I'm doing. Because of so much texture, I'm worrying about the midtones later. If I was creating something that was smooth, then my process will be entirely different. So, you know, that is what is important. When you're painting, sometimes it's hard to find a framework to follow because every artwork sometimes requires a little bit of adjustments. Sometimes you want to work from light to dark. Sometimes you just want to go as dark as possible and then do the whites on top, like this one. And, you know, you develop this with your experience. I've been asked why I didn't do everything with an airbrush. First of all, that wouldn't work so good. You know, if I was doing a portrait, I'll be doing mostly like 50% with the airbrush and 50% removing paint, or maybe I'll be using brushes. But on a dragon, that would be insane to just airbrush everything. It would look soft. And you know, on a motorcycle like this is another point I want to talk to you. If you want to paint motorcycles, you know, we're not there to make cute things. You know, sometimes yes, but most of the time, when you're creating amazing art, the people want to pay you so that your art, they feel represented. They feel like, you know, this guy does amazing art and it looks aggressive, it looks sharp, it looks top notch. People want to represent themselves, you know, of who they are, and you know, they're winners, they are go-getters, they're the people who make things happen. So with my art, this for example, you know, I want to create that. I want to create the textures to be strong. As a matter of fact, I'm not following the reference image perfectly. I'm making them a little more dramatic. And by dramatic, I mean the contrast is a little more strong. So contrast is an ally when we are painting. It makes the things to be softer or to be aggressive. That's what I'm doing here. And this is a black motorcycle, so I want to have my textures to be clearly defined. If I went and I airbrush everything, then the texture is going to be soft, it's going to be blurry, it's going to look sloppy. And I think one of the things that separate work that looks good and works that, you know, are still missing the mark is the selection of tools. And when it comes to selection of tools, it's more in your mind, you know, it's more like, who do you listen to? Are you the kind of person that want to do everything just with an airbrush? Are you the kind of person that wants to adopt many other tools? Sometimes tools that you have never ever seen other people use. And it's okay, you know, I cannot tell you be one or be the other. That's entirely up to you. Feel free to do whatever you want. You know, you're an artist, you have invested so much into your art, so much time, money and effort, and don't let anybody tell you what you can do and what you cannot do in terms of using tools. Unless you are into an art competition. When you enter an art competition, they'll tell you the rules. These are the rules and you need to follow them. But in any other example, in any other situation, probably you're doing your own paintings for yourself. Maybe you don't sell to customers, you don't take commissions, you just paint because it's relaxing, it's fun, and you love doing that. Then you make your own rules. Don't feel like you need to follow anybody's rules. You know, some people love doing everything freehand just with the airbrush, and that's amazing. You know, like even for me, that's really hard because doing just that, it's really difficult. And I respect and admire people who do that, and there are some teachers that actually teach that. But me personally, first of all, I don't like it, and second, it just makes my work a lot harder to do. So I make that decision. And that's the same thing I'm trying to tell you here. You are free, you were given this life for free, and you decide to do whatever you want to do with it. You don't need to follow nobody's rules. unless you're in a competition, of course. So until now you have seen that. Okay, let's get back to this painting. Let me explain you a little more of what's happening. So at this point I had created a lot of those highlights, and I've gone back and used the airbrush, you know, and when I go back with the airbrush, usually my paint is more reduced, it's more transparent, so it gives me more time to adjust the values. I don't want to go too dark too fast, because then I'm pretty much screwed and I got to go back and remove the paint again. So I want to go soft, I want to go careful, I want to go darkening those textures slowly, because with the airbrush you can go really dark really quick, even when the paint is transparent. When you want the paint to cover, it doesn't cover, but when you don't want it to go so dark so fast, it does. I don't know what that is called into airbrushing, but I know maybe you have seen that before. So I want the paint really transparent, and I want to darken things slowly. Take my time and darken things slowly, and things get darker than you think, because when the paint dries, we're using acrylic paint. Createx is acrylic paint. You can use golden too. That paint darkens as it dries. So eventually you realize, oh, I went too dark, and you have two options: redo that part or leave it, you know. And if the part doesn't look so bad and you're like, you know what, it looks good, it's just my mind is playing tricks now, then leave it, because it's the easiest choice. So the only thing we can do to avoid a situation like that is go light, you know, build the dark lightly and build the middle tones lightly, so that they darken little by little, and you don't go too dark and you don't overshoot that value. On this painting, I first did the top of the head. That's where I saw the most difficult textures. So I usually like to do the most difficult part first. If I'm doing a person or a figure, I go for the face first, because that's usually the most difficult part. And if I mess that up, then do whatever I need to do to restart, and then I continue working comfortably, not thinking, you know, what if I mess that up later? You know, I don't like having something in my mind bugging me like that. So once I finished the top of the head, it gave me, at that point I was just cruising along. At that point you have feedback, you have seen the work coming together, and you feel more confident on every single painting at whatever level you are. Even if you're a professional and you're doing whatever you're doing, even portraits, once you start seeing the painting coming out good, you feel more confident. At that point you start taking more chances, and actually you become more creative. So yeah, I did the head there, and then I started doing the bottom part, or I don't know what that's called, but under the head, you know, where the mouth splits the top and the bottom. So I started doing that, and that part was still difficult. However, on this thing, the focal point is mostly around the eye, you know, that's where people are gonna see the most. And besides, the bottom part it's more dark. So I created a lot of textures like crazy there, and see some of that I hid it, or I covered it with black paint, but still allowing a lot of that to show through. If I create texture there where it doesn't belong, but I feel like, you know what, this looks kind of weird, then I can always black it out completely, because there's such a deep shadow there. So I use those areas to my advantage. If you notice earlier, on that black shadow, I went really dark there. I mean, like a lot of texture there, because it's so dark that I can cover it. So I use that as my safety net. Okay, just to recap this video, the process I took for this dragon, and I'm not saying this process works for everything, but I want to repeat the process I took in case you want to attempt to do something similar. I went first for the dark areas, so that on those dark areas I have paint to remove in order to create the highlights, and the texture on this painting was created on the highlights. So after I create the highlights, I come back with the airbrush and adjust the middle tones, and also darken out some shadows that I might need to get even darker. And that's basically it. So basically, establish the shadows, paint the highlights, in this case I remove the paint, and then adjust the middle tones with the airbrush, using transparent paint, of course, so you don't get too dark too quickly. That's it. That's the framework I use for this painting. Alright, I hope this helped you a lot, and if it did, just let me know. And if you have any questions, leave it in the comments. I try to do my best to answer questions in the comments. If you want to learn about my courses, remember you can visit fineartairbrushcourses.com, and that's where you should go and check out next. Alright, God bless you. Take care.